What's up? You're listening to The Long Game, and I'm your host, David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital. In this episode, we chat with Eve Alexander. Eve is VP of Product Marketing at Seismic, a global leader in enablement, helping organizations engage customers, enable teams, and ignite revenue growth. Eve has spent the past 3.5 years building and leading the Seismic product marketing team that includes core product marketing, industry and solution marketing, competitive intelligence, pricing and packaging, and launching programs and content. Before Seismic, she held product marketing leadership roles at Checker and DocuSign. In this conversation, we talk about the evolution of the role of product marketing and the importance of having product marketers as a strategic business partner. Eve shares how her product marketing teams have helped shape business narratives to speak to the right pain points in the right way to the right people, and how they develop the insights to build those narratives. We also talk about building teams, hiring, and what she would do if she were starting her product marketing career today. I think you're going to learn a lot. Here's my conversation with Eve Alexander. Eve, welcome to The Long Game.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yes, I was excited to have you on a show. And some context here is I've noticed that product marketing seems to have a big resurgence right now, and that people are really realizing the importance of it with a lot of the commoditization happening in software and all the competition, which we'll get into all of that. I'm excited to talk to you about that. But maybe a good place to start is for the audience to get to know you a little bit. Will you do a quick rundown of your career, including maybe what you believe are pivotal moments and decision points leading up to where you are today?
Yeah. And I love that product marketing is having a resurgence. I think that has the potential to be a really strategic role, which is part of what makes it so fun. But my background, I've had a pretty kind of going up the ladder within product marketing background, which is, I think, not super traditional. But I actually started in commercial real estate after I graduated from college. I did that for about 5 years. It was fun. I joined right in the middle of 2005, maybe. It was a hot market. I got to ride it all the way down during the financial crisis. And it was like, oh, holy cow, please get me out of this. This is too volatile for me. Like, let me find something else. And I went to business school knowing that I wanted to transition industries. And I thought at the time it would either be tech or maybe consumer packaged goods. And I quickly, in talking to a lot of different people, was like, okay, tech, way better fit for me. Just the way that people are spending their time, the problems that they're tackling seemed really interesting. So did an internship after graduation. I got my first full-time role in B2B SaaS marketing. And I've since worked for 3 hyper-growth companies, DocuSign, which at the time I joined was not the household name that it is now, but that was a great hyper-growth experience. I then went to an HR tech startup and led product marketing there for a year before making the move over to Seismic, where I am now. And I've been leading the product marketing team here, and I think I'm coming up on 4 years.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig in and kind of hear a bit more about what sort of product marketing challenges you run into as a company grows so quickly. I imagine there's a lot of changing in positioning and messaging as you go after a different market. You said something in passing just now, maybe is a good place to start this discussion around seeing that product marketing can be a very strategic role. And maybe the context I have around a question is, I remember when I was at HubSpot, I never fully understood what product marketers did. I knew they did all the product launches. It didn't feel as strategic. And I, of course, have now learned that it is a very strategic role. But there was some point where it felt it was more of like an execution role rather than a more strategic role. But I'd love to hear how you've seen the role evolve during your career and kind of where you see it as today.
Yeah, I think it probably depends a lot on the company you're at and just kind of the stage that it's in based on what I've seen. But I think, on one end of the spectrum, I've seen product marketing teams be kind of like doing deal support, a sales rep calls them in and they're like, hey, help us make this pitch deck look pretty for this one specific customer, or doing like project management for launches where they're managing the checklist. And I think that's probably kind of the one end of the spectrum that you're talking about. And both of those areas they're not the highest and best use for people in product marketing roles. And I think the other more strategic end of the spectrum is the foundational like company strategy. Who are you targeting? For example, my team, we've just led work on ideal customer profile, where we were analyzing everything from what's the total addressable market of these sub verticals and segments that we're going after, what's our historical performance, like deal size, win rate, sales cycle time, conversion rate to opportunity, and then what does our pipeline and kind of future growth look like? And that's super strategic, because if you get it right, if you're, connecting with your colleagues in growth marketing, with your colleagues in sales, and everyone is shaking hands and saying, yes, we're going after this ideal customer profile, all of a sudden you're driving more and higher quality pipeline, you're being more efficient with your marketing spend. Your sales teams, in theory, have a better chance of hitting quota because they're getting better opportunities fed to them. That's kind of one example of the way that I see product marketing having the opportunity to be really strategic. But you got to get some of those wins in order to earn that opportunity, typically.
Yeah, the tension, it's interesting how you brought up, like, that's ideally something that product marketing helps inform. In a previous role I was in, I remember there was tension of, hey, shouldn't the sales team be the ones determining the stuff, because they're the ones on the phone all day and they're the ones figuring out what resonates and all of that stuff. Have you seen it before? And if so, like, how do you typically work around that? I'll call it tension sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, it's a collaboration, right? And nothing is happening in a silo. I think some organizations are better at that than others. And I'm not going to claim that I get it perfect every single time. But for the example that I was just giving with ICP, Ideal Customer Profile, it very much was hey, this is what the data, like PMM crunched the numbers. Here's what the data says. And then we went and we socialized it with sales leadership. And we said, does this resonate with what you're seeing? And they pushed back in a couple of areas. They said, hey, we get that these numbers say that this is really valuable, but actually, we don't have that many good case studies to be able to point to, or customer stories to be able to point to. Or they said, hey, what about this sub-industry that we're seeing be pretty common? Can we lean in more here? So it's a collaboration. And same is true for, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of work that product marketing does is related to messaging and positioning. We probably redo our story once every 12 to 18 months, which is exhausting for everybody, but really important work. And, you definitely can't do that by yourself. You have to be working with not just sales, but we worked really closely with customer success, with our solutions engineering team, with our product team to craft that. Because if you are telling the same story, that story really is essentially your company strategy. So, if you get that story right, then everything follows from there.
Yeah, it's interesting here. I do remember when I was at an earlier stage company, I think we were changing the narrative every 3 to 6 months. I didn't fully understand why at the time. I still don't really understand why, but maybe if you could use your past experience or even your current roles as examples, why is there a need to constantly revisit the story and the positioning of the company? Like, for folks who not be familiar with why the exercise is necessary.
Yeah. The most recent one that we went through was about a year ago now. And the reason why we decided to make a change is because we found that our story was pretty product centric. And a salesperson would be on a call with a prospect and it would very quickly go into, let's get into the weeds of the product. Let's talk features and functionality. And, maybe there's a time and a place for that, though I'm not really sure. Like, typically, you want to be focused on the value that you're delivering and the outcomes that you can help your customers with. And so it was a big undertaking to work, like I said, across the entire organization to figure out what exactly are the outcomes that we're delivering. How do we want to articulate that? How does that map to the handful of use cases that we solve for? And then let's get to the product. But that's a big behavior change too. So that's one time. Another big kind of pivotal moment that I see for organizations in changing their story is after an acquisition or a major new product launch where, fundamentally the value that you're delivering to the market has substantially changed and you have to talk about it in a new way. And other times, it's trends in the industry. Like, anybody who isn't talking about AI right now as part of the story that they're bringing to market, they're missing an opportunity there.
Yeah. And since you brought up AI, I'll kind of use that as a jumping point on what I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation around feeling like product marketing has kind of a resurgence in people understanding the value of it even if you just look at the AI space, so many competitors, so many products doing almost nearly the same exact thing with maybe some small nuances here and there. How do you think about, even when it comes to outcomes-based selling, for instance, like what you just mentioned now, how do you think about differentiating with all these competitors nowadays? Because if you're selling on outcomes, what if your competitors are also selling on similar outcomes? How do you think about that?
Yeah. What's really fascinating is they aren't necessarily doing it well. And I'm not trying to knock any of our competitors, like they're good companies. But one of the things that we do as part of our win-loss program, and I can't take credit for this, we've got a great leader on our team who is leading this area. Every quarter, she interviews 25 buyers that either went with Seismic or they went with one of our competitors to find out like why they chose us, why they didn't choose us. And that is gold. We use this data for so much stuff. But what we find is one of the biggest reasons why our customers choose us, aside from product capabilities or whatever, is the sales experience and the buyer really feeling like our sales team understood the challenge that they had, understood the outcome that they were trying to drive, and really tailored the way that we went through those motions with them to address that buyer's specific challenges and pain points. So it's easier said than done, I think, to drive that kind of a sales process. And kudos to our go-to-market team for being able to do that.
Yeah, maybe without sharing too much of the secrets that might have come up from this, it sounds like a competitive intelligence program. Are there any learnings that maybe you could share that you've gotten from those insights that you were able to implement into maybe the story you're telling? Like, is there an example you can share?
Yeah. I mean, a couple come to mind, and again, I'll keep them fairly high level, but one of the places that this body of work really informs is our product roadmap. So it's pretty easy to say, oh, competitor X has these 5 capabilities that we don't have, and maybe draw the conclusion we need all 5 capabilities. But if, as we're talking to our customers, we're finding that we're not actually losing because of those capabilities, but there's this other set of functionality, for example, that they're looking for, that really helps our product team make better decisions around what to prioritize, because they don't have, unlimited engineering resources to build everything that they want to. They have to be selective, and we can come to the table and say, here are the 2 things that we think matter the most from your product roadmap that are going to impact our win rate. And here, these other 3 things are nicer to have. So that's one example. The other example that comes to mind is we had a competitor recently kind of emerge from, I don't want to say emerge from nothing. Like they've existed, but they weren't that, we didn't see them that frequently. They weren't seeming that threatening for us. And all of a sudden, they seemed to be everywhere, and our sales team was pretty freaked out by it. And as we did some analysis and talked to buyers around why they were going with this other competitor, or as it turns out, why they weren't and why they were choosing us, we were able to go back to the sales team and say, hey, we know it seems like this competitor is everywhere, but we're actually doing really well against them. And here's how our sellers are winning, the ones that are winning against them. This is what they're saying. This is how they're approaching the conversation successfully. And so we were able to kind of help calm down some anxiety, I guess I would say, that the field was experiencing, and help really kind of turn things around and drive quite a number of competitive takeaways as a result of that.
I love that. So for my own learning, just to repeat what I heard. So one was, it seems like the common theme is don't just pay attention to what competitors are doing like on a surface level and validate it with customers. And the two things were, hey, just because your competitors are building these other features doesn't mean you should just go copy them. Like validate with your customers if those are even valuable or not. I love that one a lot. And then just because they're coming up a lot, maybe there's a lot of sparkle and like some newsworthy stuff they're doing and they're showing up a lot more, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're winning deals from you. So gut checking yourself by talking to customers rather than just jumping to these conclusions.
Yeah. And marrying data with anecdote. And I think, we've been talking about product marketing moving from tactical to strategic. And I would say one of the biggest things that's helping drive that is the opportunity to be more data-driven. Product marketing, I think, close to 15 years ago when I got into the function, like you had to rely on anecdote. You had to go talk to the sales team and say, like, how is this pitch deck working for you? Or what are you seeing happening? And now there are just a lot more opportunities, whether it's because we now have a tech stack that supports data that we didn't have before, or people are getting really sophisticated, like our competitive intelligence leader, with how they're measuring win rate or competitive intelligence so that they can come to the table with, here's what the numbers actually say, whether it's from our customers or other data sets.
This conversation is also making me wonder, out beyond the specific role itself, I've noticed that there are like communities like Product Marketing Alliance. There's Sharebird, which in my research I saw you had contributed to a bit. There's go-to-market conferences where there are like VPs of product marketing now speaking at these conferences. And I wonder if that has anything to do with people starting to see the role as more strategic rather than like, hey, product marketers only do product launches or something like that. It seems like there's just a general better understanding of the role.
I'm connected with a gazillion product marketers on LinkedIn, and this is a really big topic of conversation that is happening within our network. And I think a lot, like one of the big trends or one of the big topics that I see is product marketing leaders are really owning the commentary on here's the value that product marketing is driving. And they're making it, I shouldn't say they, we as a cohort are putting emphasis on communicating the value and the impact that we're having for the organization. And maybe 10, 15 years ago, product marketing leaders back then were doing the same, but I don't think so. I think that the reporting back to the business on why this matters to you, different department heads, is something that is more recent. And we're picking up from peers in other departments who have done that really successfully and, garnered more resources, for example, as a result.
One of the books that I've started recommending a lot more is Obviously Awesome by April Dunford. I'm not sure if that's something like you have your team read or anything like that, but it helped me better understand the role of product marketing and the strategy that goes behind everything, and just made me better appreciate the PMMs I worked with, like significantly. Like the way I spoke to them was much more knowledgeable rather than like, it made the role much less nebulous to me.
That's so cool that you did that. And she's amazing. She's got a great podcast that I like to listen to. So I think the other place that I've really seen a great intersection with content marketing, with demand generation is on integrated campaign planning. I think you had one of my friends and former colleagues, Joe Lee, on the podcast a while ago, and he and I collaborated together when we were at Checker on this integrated campaign framework where I came to the table with, here are the key audiences, here are the, upcoming big events or product launches that we have coming up, like big milestone activities. And then we got on a whiteboard with members of his team, members of my team, and we basically just collaborated and drew out how we thought we could put the campaigns together in a way that addressed that. And he has since told me, that was I really felt the value of product marketing after we did that. So that's another, I think, place that's a great opportunity for the teams to be working together.
Yeah. So because you brought it up, integrated campaigns are also a nebulous concept to me. Joe, I used to work with Joe at People AI, and he has also used that phrase. I'm now glad I didn't ask him because I can now ask you, what is an integrated campaign framework? And could you maybe use a specific example of what does that look like? What were you all whiteboarding about, and what came out of that planning session?
I'll probably use a more recent example because that was about 4 years ago. And I'll do my best to represent an integrated campaign, but I think it'd be an interesting question for you to ask, a head of revenue or growth marketing that you get on the podcast. But I think of an integrated campaign as basically the set of campaigns that an organization is going to run for a given period, say a year, and articulating how each of those campaigns fit together into a bigger picture, and how each of the arms of marketing or potentially sales are going to contribute to those campaigns. So, for example, at Seismic, I think it's fair game to talk about this. We're going to do a big thought leadership campaign, and we're kicking that off in a couple of months. I won't get into too many of the details on it because our CMO is super excited to unveil it. So I can't preview it, but big thought leadership campaign. And then under that, we have 3 demand gen campaigns. The first one is basically an entry level kind of 101 campaign for buyers who've maybe never purchased an enablement platform before. And we're really focused on articulating what's the value of enablement? What are some of the best practices? How do you go about purchasing enablement software if you've never done that before? The second campaign is kind of more of a 201 where we're largely targeting our existing customers, but maybe some prospects as well. And it's more sophisticated. We're going to be talking about how trends related to AI, related to buyer and seller preferences, like learning styles of new generations entering the workforce and how they want to be enabled, are impacting the function. And oh, by the way, it maps to some products that we're launching in a couple of months. And then there's one more campaign too that also connects. So the idea is from there, the product marketing team is working on the targeting for the different titles and industries. We're working on the messaging. The content marketing team is working on the content that aligns to the buyer journey for each of those audiences and campaigns. Our growth marketing team is working on activation through paid and organic. PR is working on earned media, and the list goes on. So it's really orchestrated. And that was such a long-winded answer to such a simple question.
No, I appreciate that. I think I understood it conceptually. Okay, so you have this one thing and all your marketing activities align around that. But it helped for you to break it down from okay, there's 3 campaigns and each campaign probably has something being done in each of the channels for that campaign as well. And that's why you needed to have this whole whiteboarding session to map everything out, at least if it was for a year ahead or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you don't sit down and figure out how all of these pieces fit together, you get death by 1,000 marketing tactics, which is
Yes.
not very effective, but it's also like super painful for teams who are like, what is the priority here, people? Like, I'm getting a request to write a white paper over here, and there's an event that we're hosting over here. Like, what is most important? Is it just the loudest person? And by putting all of these things together into a plan and a framework, it creates more clarity and focus.
Yeah. Could we rewind a little bit? So it sounds like you have the campaign that you're starting to plan out already, and in a couple of months it'll go live. What were the steps to get to a point where everyone was aligned on what the campaign should be? Because I imagine that also required its own planning process or like discussions. Like, what are those conversations like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it started off in product marketing, and the leadership team sat down and we looked at, okay, what are the launches that we have coming up? Who are our ideal customer profiles? Who do we really want to tackle? What feedback have we been getting from sales or marketing about key stories that we need to be telling? What events do we know are coming up that are going to be important places for us to really tell a compelling story to the market? And based on all of those inputs, we put together essentially a first pass where we said, okay, we think there's a thought leadership campaign. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we'll come back to it and collaborate with people to get there. And then we think the three like pipeline generating campaigns that sit underneath that thought leadership are going to be these three. And then we just went on a roadshow. I went to the marketing leadership team and shared that with them. We went to sales leaders and shared it with them. And we went to product leaders and shared it with them and got input. And for the most part, what I found is people were pretty happy that we had come to the table with something that they could react to. And there weren't really substantial changes that came as a result of that. But we did make some adjustments and refinements along the way based on feedback that we got. Like, one of the campaigns that we were running originally, we were envisioning it only being a prospect campaign. And my colleague who heads up growth marketing said, this could also be really good for selling into new buying centers within our existing customers. So maybe it's a different business unit, for example. So it feels like it's a new customer, but it's actually an existing logo. So those kinds of adjustments we made. And then the thought leadership campaign came together through a massive brainstorm with all of the folks that I just mentioned, getting in a room with a whiteboard and riffing on what are the, trends that are happening, what are the pain points that our buyers are experiencing. And we whittled it down to basically 5 big ideas that we wanted to build some research and tell some stories around for the year.
I appreciate you getting so deep into the nitty gritty on a lot of these things and like helping educate myself and our listeners. I wanted to go back to something we talked about earlier around in product marketing. You often have to revisit your messaging and your positioning as the market changes. And I'd love to talk about that, the role maybe in terms of through the lens of a high growth company, because you're on your 3rd high growth company now. I'm trying to figure out in real time how to form this question, but what does that role, how does that evolve like as the company's growing so quickly?
How does the story evolve as the company is growing so quickly?
Yeah, how does the story evolve? How does your role evolve in product marketing?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about product marketing is it's such a broad focus. Like, I think about product marketing as being market insights, go-to-market strategy, messaging and content, product launches, and then go-to-market enablement. That's how I think about the role. And you're always leaning into a couple of them at any given time. And some of them are going to be more important than others. For example, for my company, when I first joined Seismic, I would say that the most important areas that we needed to get under control were new product launches and go-to-market strategy. And new product launches, we were basically treating every product launch like a brand new thing. And we didn't have a playbook for them. And so it was hard to scale. And that's low hanging fruit, because once you get something like that in place and you have a playbook, it's not like you have to follow it rigidly. You shouldn't follow it rigidly, but you can quickly scale and then move on to focus on other things. With the go-to-market strategy piece, for me, that ended up really being around hiring and creating roles on the product marketing team that didn't exist before, and making sure that I had the right people who had expertise, for example, in financial services, which is a big industry for us, to be able to come to the table and help support it. So I think maybe to try to succinctly answer your question, you have to start with aligning with your executives to understand what are the biggest business priorities, and then make a couple of bets within product marketing on, okay, if the biggest business priority is moving from selling a single product to multi-SKU selling, this is where I'm going to focus my team. And I have to be able to tell a new story if that's the big goal, because the story we've been telling really isn't telling this bigger vision or this bigger picture. So align with your executives, figure out the big bets, and then execute, and resist the urge to spread yourself across everything everywhere.
Yeah, I really appreciate just one, starting from principles around, well, what does the business need? Like, it doesn't matter what your skills are. It depends on what the business needs. And ideally, you can support with those things. And the thing that's standing out that's come up a few times is how the story needs to evolve. How did that happen for Seismic? Because at least from when I last checked, it seems like there's a lot more going on in terms of the product line. How did that story have to evolve? If you can share kind of the specifics there.
Yeah. So the most recent round of evolution that we did, we really initiated it probably in October, November of not this past year, but the year before. And this was like a big update. And we knew that we needed to transition from product centric to outcome centric. And we also, as you were just saying, Seismic started as more of a focus on content and controlling the content chaos that exists within an organization, helping drive really robust personalization and engagement and insights to help you understand what's working, what isn't. But since then, we've acquired and built additional products that mean that we have this full suite. And so we also needed that story to be coming through. And like pretty much every example I've given you so far, it started with a brainstorm. I got a bunch of leaders from across the organization. I think I maybe even listed them before, but like sales, customer success, solutions engineering, product, a couple of departments within marketing. And I'm sure I'm missing a handful of awesome people that participated in it too. We did a 2-day offsite, and we really focused on, okay, what are the outcomes that we're driving? What are our key differentiators? Not just product differentiators, but company differentiators, and used those two things as, okay, if these are the outcomes that we want to lead with, and these are the differentiators that we need to make sure that our buyers understand, how can we craft a story that connects those? And it was a workshop, and we got part of the way there in the workshop. And then I have an awesome team that I work with within product marketing. And we kind of took the work that the cross-functional team did and really continued to shape it, socialized it a lot with individual sellers, pitched it to customers and prospects to see how it was resonating, and then began rolling it out.
At risk of getting a little too into the details, what was like the before and after? Like, what was the story before that, and then what was it afterward?
I would say, and I'm glossing over a couple of revs of the story, but when I first started at Seismic, the story was heavily focused on, I think it was really oriented on storytelling and helping go-to-market organizations craft and deliver the right narrative to their buyers. And what it's really evolved to is more of a focus on the value that enablement, not just the function of enablement, but the practice of enablement can deliver to an organization in terms of driving go-to-market productivity, buyer engagement, which means improving win rates or deal sizes, being able to drive optimizations within the way that you're going to market your operations, and finally getting to market more quickly so that you're capturing revenue sooner. So really focusing on those outcomes, and then painting a picture for our customers of, if you're here right now, we can help you get to this next level and drive this set of outcomes.
Got it. Yeah. Even just hearing you say them out loud, I'm like, oh yeah, those are two very different stories in how you talk about the product and the company.
Yeah. And the work is never done. Like, if you're in product marketing, you better freaking love telling stories, because you are going to be updating your narrative pretty regularly. Because, like, if you're doing your job well, it means you're listening to the market and you're figuring out what's resonating, and the market doesn't stay still. So you've got to kind of keep tweaking and refining.
You just mentioned a couple minutes ago that part of your role in figuring out what the biggest business priorities are, part of that tends to be hiring a team. And so this question always comes up when I speak to other folks in marketing or just business in general, is that hiring is one of the hardest things to do for a role like product marketing. And I guess there are like sub specialties within that role as well. How do you think about like hiring product marketers and like building high performing teams?
Yeah. Oh boy. I think it's part gut and part science. Like, it's a combination. In terms of how I think about hiring, I really put a lot of thought into what are the competencies or skills that I need this person to have. And there's some of the hard skills, like you need product marketers generally to be good storytellers, like we were just talking about, but you also need them to be good communicators. They need to have presentation skills, written skills, and they also need soft skills. Like, one of the most important things for a product marketer is being able to influence without authority. Like, you don't necessarily control everybody. You don't control everybody in the organization, but you need them paddling in the same direction. So there's kind of a core set of competencies that are generally most relevant, like apply to any product marketing role. But sometimes you need specialized skill sets. Like, you might need somebody who's more analytical in a pricing and packaging function or in a competitive function than you do in somebody who's working largely on messaging. So start with the competencies and the skills that you need. And I know that this is maybe not a popular opinion, especially for candidates out there, but I really believe in having candidates do projects too. And I try to make it as lightweight as possible. I've played with having them do a case that's based on Seismic or the company that I'm working for at the time. I've since started to ease up on that and do something that's like, tell us about an area that you are knowledgeable about. It can be anything. We had a member of our team come and do a presentation about crocheting, but you're literally like, you're just trying to assess, does this person have the communication skills? Can they structure their thinking? Can they engage their audience, which doesn't come through, I think, in standard behavioral presentations. So that's the hiring side. On the team side, I really think that authenticity and community building and transparency are kind of the three things that I think a lot about. When I was first a people manager, I actually ended up getting promoted. I was part of a team of peers and I got promoted to be my peer's boss. And I thought all of a sudden, it was stressful. And I thought that it meant that I had to have all of the answers all of a sudden, and that I had to be like buttoned up and polished and like know everything. And I'm sure you can imagine how that went for my relationships with my colleagues. Like, it did not go super well. And I learned that it's okay to not have all of the answers. And that's what I mean by authenticity. It's just bringing my full self, warts and all, to the role. In terms of community, I think I undervalued this one early on in my career too. When I first joined Seismic, it was the heart of the pandemic. And we had instituted the team that I inherited was meeting 3 times a week. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is a ton. And the previous leader, turns out, absolutely knew what he was doing. And people loved the regular check-ins of being with each other. And we ended up reducing it. We don't meet 3 times a week, but we do meet every Friday. And we kept a theme that he had introduced, which is rating our week. So we go around the horn and everyone rates their week on a scale of 1 to 10. And it's just like, it's a way to build connection, which is particularly important in this hybrid environment.
Our entire team is remote, and that's something I think about like almost every day around like, all right, what kind of things can we try out to help the team feel more connected and talk about more than just work? Because it's so easy to just have these transactional Zoom meetings, 30 minutes at a time of like, all right, here's the thing I need to talk to you about, and then hop off, but never actually learn about each other, connect on a personal level.
It's so hard, right? Like, because when in a Zoom world, your calendar is just like meeting. And you just don't have time to be like, hey, tell me about your pit bull. Like, I would like to learn more about her. And so, yeah, just creating the space to have, like, to bring life into the workplace, I think is really valuable. We also do every 6 months a PMM summit where we peel off several hours each day to do like dedicated learning and workshops, like professional development, and getting our peers and other teams to come in and workshop various topics. And the team really likes that as a kind of community building technique too.
How do you structure those? Is there kind of an agenda that you put together of here's what we're going to talk about, or like, does your team bring things to the table that they want to talk about?
Yeah. So it varies. Typically, the team has submitted some ideas of topics that are top of mind for them. My leadership team meets and we talk through, okay, what are the most important topics that we need to be talking about? We look at the list that we've collected from the team. We think about, what are the business needs or priorities, and we marry the two together. And there's somebody on our team, I think, my lucky stars that she's part of our team, who actually plans this thing and she orchestrates everything. And we assign each block of time. If, for example, we've got a topic on what's our enablement plan going to be for the next 6 months, somebody on the team is assigned to put that session together to work with our enablement team to structure maybe a brainstorm or whatever the set of breakouts might look like. And so we spread the wealth in terms of prepping for it and following up on it.
Yeah, I don't know if you see, but I'm taking notes on the side because this is something we're trying to figure out. How do we implement this in a way that it's valuable and doesn't feel like we're forcing something upon a team? Like, it's for their benefit. And sometimes it's challenging to get folks involved and engaged because there's already so much work to do. Now it feels like another thing to do. So I appreciate those tips.
Yeah, it can be hard. I would say my one pointer there is less is more. Like, resist the urge to do 30 topics. Just do, 2 topics a day, total of 6 topics over the course of the week. And that will be more than enough. And will help reduce the anxiety around, oh my God, there's so much going on. How can we possibly do one more thing?
You mentioned earlier about hiring that you look for more of the, I don't like the phrase, but like these soft skills and understanding how well they communicate, and even some of the more, I guess, like hard skills of PMM or marketing in general. What's your favorite way to validate and test for these skills that are a little more difficult to test for? I'm curious if you have had anything that works for you.
What I was talking about in terms of having them do a little mini case or presentation, that's a really big one. There are specific candidates that I have had where I thought, oh yeah, they're a person. And then they went through the case and they couldn't communicate clearly. And maybe it would have worked out great with them. I don't know. I opted not to hire them. So that's probably the biggest one. I think the ability to measure, can somebody influence? I tend to ask questions around, like, where I basically ask them, hey, tell me about a time when you disagreed with leadership. What did you do? And I'm not necessarily listening for, did you get them to change their minds? But I am listening for, how did you have a productive conversation? Which people did you bring into the conversation? How did you navigate a difference of agreement? Did you debate it, or did you just say, yep, okay, you say it, this is how I'm going to do it, I'm going to go do it. I want somebody who's got a little bit more backbone and who's at least going to try to debate and influence decision making. And product marketing, at least at Seismic, is viewed as a strategic thought partner, and that's what the organization wants.
I love that. Yeah, it's evolved a little bit in our hiring process. Everyone does some sort of project, and before it was just a take home, and we realized, wait, we should do a live presentation, and then there should be some sort of surprise. We tell them that there's going to be an ad hoc part of the live workshop where it's the presentation, and then, hey, we're going to show you a dashboard, a reporting dashboard. Just walk us through how you might evaluate this. And it's kind of seeing how well they think on your toes and how curious they get about some of the data. Because some of the reporting that we actually show is there's spikes here and there. And we want to see if they ask about why those spikes are happening rather than just saying that there is a spike, right? So
I love that. The presenting them something that they can't prepare for and looking for what kinds of questions they ask. That's a really great idea.
So maybe one last question on PMM. And this is, I actually didn't know you went to business school to intentionally switch into product marketing. But some context here is my partner, she's in business school, and I'm meeting a lot of her classmates who say they go to business school so they can switch out of consulting into product marketing, which is really cool to hear. So from your standpoint, you've seen how the role in industry has evolved. If you were starting your product marketing career now and you were applying for these internships or want to stand out, what would you do?
That it depends on what your background is. I would say that probably the single best advice I can give that is broadly applicable is position your unique value and find the buyer, the hiring manager who values that. So to get specific about it, when I was making the switch into product marketing and into tech, I had a really hard time finding my first internship because a lot of the hiring managers were looking for people who had tech experience and or direct product marketing experience. And here I was coming in with I've done demand gen and PR and graphic design for real estate. And they just they didn't know what to do with me. But I was smart, and I really took researching each company that I was interviewing at seriously. And I eventually found a hiring manager who that's what he was looking for. He was not looking for somebody who knew exactly how to do the job. He was looking for somebody who could ask the right questions and who was curious and hungry. And he ended up hiring me for my internship. He also offered me my first full-time job at a totally different company. He had moved to DocuSign and reached out to me and was like, hey, come join me at DocuSign later. It was he's amazing. I got really lucky. And when anybody asks me about business school, I'm like, the network is the best thing. Anyway, where I'm going with that is whether that's your unique value proposition, or maybe you're coming from a different part of marketing and you're trying to position yourself as a product marketer, find the handful of things that you're going to bring to the table that are incredibly valuable, and don't worry if not every hiring manager is sold on that, because not every hiring manager will be. Some of them are going to be looking for somebody who's done exactly that thing before, but not all of them are.
Perfect. Yeah, it's applying product marketing to your job search.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And like practice it. Like I would say if there were somebody specifically who wanted to get like feedback on here's my exact situation, reach out to me or reach out to somebody in your network who has that background and say, hey, here's what I think. Does this resonate? I've got somebody in my network who did exactly that thing. And we went out to coffee and he like pitched me on his unique value proposition. And he's doing, I can't take any credit for this, but he's doing great today. He's consulting at the intersection of demand gen and product marketing, which is a pretty cool spot.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, I know we're coming up on time. And so we'll go through some rapid fire closing questions and we'll wrap up.
Cool.
All right. What is one opinion you have about business you think people would disagree with?
I don't believe that you need a mentor with a capital M. I think you can get lots of like mini mentorship from kind of a board of mentors that you can have.
Yeah, it's almost like don't place so much weight on that word, that label mentor. Just ask a bunch of people for advice and they kind of turn into your lowercase m mentor.
Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
And maybe this is related, but what's one impactful piece of advice you've been given?
A former chief revenue officer that I used to work with told me to prioritize my own success. And what he meant by that was product marketing, and maybe this is relevant for non-product marketers out there too, but product marketing, you're so frequently involved in like all of these different projects and other people's success depends on you. Product needs you to launch a product to be successful. Sales needs you to launch a sales play to be successful. But if you don't take a step back and whether it's as a leader, prioritize your team's success or, for in that specific instance, the CRO was saying, you have a keynote coming up. Make sure that you're not just working on the executive's keynote, work on your keynote too. Like you need to be good and you need to practice your presentation. And that has made a big difference in terms of how I spend my time. And it's really served me well.
It feels so obvious when you say it out loud, but it's so easy to fall into that trap of solving for others and then at the expense of your own success. So I appreciate you kind of giving listeners a reminder there. What's one book you'd recommend more people read?
The book that I'm constantly recommending to my teammates, back to the conversation we were having about influence, is a book called Influence by a guy named Robert Cialdini. The concept is basically like how you get good ideas to flourish and how not all good ideas are just naturally going to rise to the top because they're good ideas. You actually have to put in work to get those seen and adopted. And so I think that that's a great one for anybody who's trying to think about how to navigate an organization.
Yeah, it's almost like you should have the question, have you read Influence on the job applications to understand if they can influence.
How seriously do you take this topic?
Where can people find you on the internet?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. I don't remember my URL. I think it's just /Eve Alexander. I hope so. But that's the best spot.
We'll make sure to link to your profile. Eve, it was a pleasure to have you on a show. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, it was really fun to chat.